The letter arrived in Quinn Zeller's calloused hands on a Tuesday morning in March of 1876, smudged with dirt from the long journey to Evanston, Wyoming territory, and he read it 3 times before accepting that the woman who'd agreed to marry him had described herself as nothing more than ordinary. Quinn stood on the porch of his ranch house, the wind whipping across the open plains, and wondered what kind of woman would travel 1,500 miles to wed a stranger and call herself plain, unremarkable, forgettable even, as if warning him not to expect much. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket, feeling the weight of it against his chest, like a promise he hadn't quite understood yet. The railway station in Evanston was a modest wooden structure that served as the gateway to everything beyond Wyoming's rugged territory, and Quinn arrived there on a bright April morning with his hat freshly brushed and his best shirt cleaned as well as he could manage without a woman's touch. He'd been running his cattle ranch alone for 3 years since his parents passed from fever, and the loneliness had become a physical thing, a presence in every empty room and silent meal. His neighbor, old Samuel, had suggested the mail-order bride agency after watching Quinn eat yet another solitary dinner, and Quinn had written his letter with shaking hands, certain no woman would want a simple rancher with mud under his fingernails and nothing but hard work to offer. The train's whistle cut through the morning air, and Quinn's heart hammered against his ribs as the great iron beast pulled into the station with a hiss of steam and the screech of brakes. Passengers began disembarking, and he scanned each face, looking for the woman from the small photograph she'd sent, though the image had been so faded he could barely make out her features. A family passed him, then a businessman, then 2 cowboys heading for the saloons, and Quinn began to worry she'd changed her mind until he saw her standing alone on the platform with a single worn carpetbag clutched in both hands. She was small, perhaps 5 feet and 3 inches at most, with brown hair pulled back in a simple bun and a dress that had seen better days, mended carefully at the sleeves and hem. Her face was pale from the journey, and she looked around the platform with wide eyes that held something between hope and terror. Quinn removed his hat and approached slowly, not wanting to startle her, and when she turned to face him, he saw that her eyes were the color of honey in sunlight, warm and uncertain, and entirely unlike anything he'd expected. "Miss Beatrice Garrison." His voice came out rougher than he'd intended, scraped raw by nerves. "Yes." She clutched the carpetbag tighter. "You must be Mr. Zeller. Quinn, please." He gestured toward the bag. "May I carry that for you?" She hesitated, then handed it over, and Quinn was struck by how light it was, as if she'd brought nothing of her previous life with her. They walked to his wagon in silence, the awkwardness between them thick as summer humidity, and Quinn found himself searching for something to say that wouldn't sound foolish. She'd traveled so far, left everything she knew, and he couldn't even manage a proper greeting. "The ranch is about an hour's ride from town," he said as he helped her up onto the wagon seat. "It's not much, but the land is good and the cattle are healthy. I've got a house with 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a sitting room. There's a well that runs clean year-round, and I've been working on expanding the barn." He was rambling now, filling the silence with details she probably didn't care about, but she listened politely, her hands folded in her lap. "It sounds lovely," Beatrice said quietly. "I'm grateful for the opportunity, Mr. Zeller. Quinn, I mean." "You wrote in your letter that you considered yourself ordinary," Quinn said, and immediately regretted it when he saw her face close off, her expression becoming carefully neutral. "I didn't mean anything by mentioning it. I just wondered why you'd say such a thing." Beatrice was silent for a long moment as the wagon rolled out of town and onto the open road, the mountains rising in the distance like ancient guardians. "Because it's true," she said finally. "I'm not educated beyond basic reading and writing. I'm not particularly pretty or charming or accomplished. I can cook and clean and mend clothes, but so can 1,000 other women. I didn't want you to expect something I couldn't provide. It seemed only fair to be honest." Quinn absorbed this, his hands steady on the reins. "Then I suppose I'll love ordinary forever," he said, the words coming from somewhere deep inside him before he could think better of them. "Because I'm not looking for extraordinary. I'm looking for someone real." He saw her head turn sharply toward him, but he kept his eyes on the road, afraid that if he looked at her, he'd see disbelief or pity, and he couldn't bear either. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it felt different now, less heavy, as if something had shifted in the space between them. The ranch appeared gradually over a rise, the house sitting solid and square against the endless sky, with the barn and outbuildings arranged around it like pieces on a chessboard. Quinn had spent the past week cleaning everything within an inch of its life, scrubbing floors and beating rugs and even washing the windows, though he'd done a poor job of it judging by the streaks still visible in the glass. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and helped Beatrice down, watching as she took in her new home with those honey-colored eyes. "It's bigger than I expected," she said, and he couldn't tell if she was pleased or overwhelmed. "Like I said, my parents built it with the hope of having a large family. There's just been me these past few years." He carried her bag to the porch. "I've prepared the bedroom at the end of the hall for you. I sleep in the one near the stairs. The middle room is empty if you'd like to use it for anything." Beatrice's expression softened slightly. "Separate bedrooms. I thought you'd appreciate some time to adjust," Quinn said, feeling heat rise in his face. "We'll be married in 3 days, as arranged, but I'm not the kind of man who'd rush you into anything you're not ready for. We're strangers, and strangers need time to become something more." She studied him for a long moment, and Quinn wondered what she saw, whether she was disappointed by his weathered face and rough hands, whether she regretted stepping off that train. Then she nodded once, a small smile touching the corners of her mouth. "Thank you, Quinn. That's very considerate." He showed her through the house, pointing out the kitchen with its cast iron stove, and the pantry he'd stocked with supplies, the sitting room with its worn but comfortable furniture, the bedrooms with their simple furnishings. Beatrice moved through each room slowly, touching things lightly as if to confirm they were real, and Quinn found himself watching her instead of the house, trying to understand the woman who'd traveled so far to marry a man she'd never met. "Why did you answer my letter?" he asked as they stood in the kitchen, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. "You could have chosen any number of men. Some of them probably had more to offer than a cattle ranch in Wyoming territory." Beatrice turned from where she'd been examining the stove, her expression serious. "You wrote honestly," she said. "The other letters I received, they promised things that seemed too good to be true, or they wanted things I couldn't give. But yours was different. You wrote about the land and the work and the loneliness, and you didn't make any grand promises. You just asked for companionship and partnership. That seemed like something real, something I could actually have." "Where did you come from?" Quinn leaned against the doorframe, genuinely curious now. "Your letter mentioned St. Louis, but you didn't say much about your life there." "I worked as a seamstress in a factory," Beatrice said, her voice flat. 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, sewing the same seam over and over until my fingers bled. I lived in a boarding house with 7 other women in a room meant for 3. I had no family left after my father died last year. No prospects. Nothing but that needle and thread, and the certainty that I'd die with nothing to show for my life but calluses and eye strain. The bitterness in her tone surprised him, and Quinn saw past the careful politeness to the exhaustion and desperation that must have driven her onto that train. "That sounds like hell," he said simply. "It was." She met his eyes. "So when your letter arrived through the agency, offering a life that included fresh air and space and the possibility of something more than survival, I jumped at it. Even if it meant marrying a stranger, even if it meant leaving everything I knew. Because anything had to be better than that factory." Quinn crossed the kitchen and took her hand, holding it gently in his larger, rougher one. Her fingers were indeed scarred, small white lines from needle pricks, and her palm had calluses in different places than his own. "I can't promise you an easy life," he said. "Ranch work is hard, and Wyoming winters are brutal, and there'll be days when we barely scrape by. But I can promise you that you'll never be just another piece of machinery again. You'll be my partner, my wife, and I'll do everything in my power to make sure you're happy here." Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes and she blinked them away quickly. "I don't expect happiness," she whispered. "I just want to matter to someone." "You already do," Quinn said, and he meant it with an intensity that surprised him. This small woman with her mended dress and scarred hands had been in his home for less than an hour, and already he felt something shifting inside his chest, a protectiveness and tenderness he hadn't experienced before. They spent the rest of the afternoon in a kind of gentle choreography, learning how to move around each other in the kitchen as Beatrice insisted on cooking dinner, despite Quinn's protests that she should rest from her journey. She made a simple stew from the supplies he'd laid in, and Quinn set the table with a care he'd never bothered with when eating alone. They ate as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and talked about small things, safe things, building a foundation of familiarity one word at a time. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation for the wedding. Quinn drove Beatrice into town to meet the preacher and to visit the general store where she could purchase fabric for a new dress. She'd protested the expense, but Quinn had been firm, wanting her to have something special for their wedding day even if it was a simple ceremony with no guests beyond old Samuel and his wife Martha as witnesses. Quinn left Beatrice with Martha to work on the dress while he handled business in town, selling several head of cattle to a buyer passing through and negotiating better terms for feed delivery. He stopped at the jeweler's shop, a cramped space run by a German immigrant named Klaus, and spent longer than he'd intended selecting a pair of simple gold wedding bands. His own was plain, but Beatrice's had a small pattern of leaves etched around the circumference, a touch of beauty in an otherwise practical purchase. When he returned to collect Beatrice, he found her and Martha laughing over tea in the older woman's kitchen, and the sound stopped him in his tracks. Beatrice's whole face transformed when she laughed, the worry lines smoothing away, her eyes bright and alive. Martha caught sight of him and waved him in, pouring him a cup of tea he didn't particularly want but drank anyway, because it gave him an excuse to sit and watch Beatrice smile. "Your bride is delightful," Martha said, patting Beatrice's hand. "And don't you let this cowboy work you too hard, dear. Men never know when to ease up unless you tell them directly." "I'll keep that in mind," Beatrice said, her cheeks flushing pink. The wedding took place on a Thursday morning in the small church at the center of Evanston, with wildflowers that Beatrice had picked herself decorating the altar, and her new dress, pale blue with white lace at the collar, rustling softly as she walked down the aisle on Samuel's arm. Quinn stood at the front of the church in his best suit, his hair slicked back and his hands shaking slightly as he watched her approach. She was beautiful in a way he hadn't fully appreciated before. Not because of any particular feature, but because of the quiet determination in her eyes and the set of her shoulders, the strength that had carried her across half a continent on faith alone. Preacher Williams conducted the ceremony with a brevity born of long practice, and when it came time for the vows, Quinn's voice rang clear and steady through the small space. I, Quinn Zeller, take you, Beatrice Garrison, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Beatrice's voice wavered slightly when she repeated her vows, but she held his gaze the entire time, and when Preacher Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made Martha sniffle into her handkerchief. It was Beatrice's first kiss, he realized with a start, feeling her inexperience in the tentative way she responded, and something fierce and possessive bloomed in his chest. The knowledge that he would be her first everything, that she'd trusted him with all of herself. They had a simple wedding breakfast at the hotel restaurant, and then Quinn drove his new wife back to the ranch, both of them quiet with the weight of what they'd just done. The house looked different somehow when they arrived, more like a home and less like just a building, and Quinn carried Beatrice over the threshold despite her laughing protests that it was unnecessary. I want to do this right, he said, setting her down gently in the front hall. I want you to remember this day as the beginning of something good. Beatrice reached up and touched his face, her palm soft against his beard-roughened jaw. I already do, she said softly. They moved through the rest of the day with a kind of nervous awareness of each other, the knowledge of the wedding night hanging between them like an unspoken question. Beatrice prepared dinner while Quinn tended to the evening chores, and they ate by lamplight, the conversation flowing more easily now that the formal ceremony was behind them. Quinn told her stories about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride before he could properly walk and helping his father drive cattle to market each fall. Beatrice spoke more about her childhood in St. Louis, about her mother who'd died when she was young and her father who'd worked himself to death in the rail yards, about the choice between the factory and starvation that had seemed like no choice at all. When the dishes were washed and put away, they stood awkwardly in the sitting room, the fire crackling in the hearth. Quinn cleared his throat. Beatrice, about tonight, I know what's expected, she said quickly, her face flushing red. I'm your wife now. That's not what I was going to say. He moved closer, taking her hands in his. I meant what I said about not rushing you. We don't have to do anything you're not ready for. I can wait until you feel comfortable with me, until this is what you want and not just what you think is required. Beatrice stared at him, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes again. Why are you being so kind to me? She whispered. I'm nobody special, just an ordinary woman who had nowhere else to go. You could demand whatever you wanted, and I'd have no choice but to comply. Quinn pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest as she trembled. You're my wife, he said firmly. That makes you the most important person in my world, and I don't want compliance, Beatrice. I want partnership. I want you to choose this life and choose me, not just accept it because you have no other options. He pulled back to look at her face. So we'll take our time. We'll learn about each other. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, you'll tell me. She buried her face in his shirt, and he felt the dampness of tears soaking through the fabric. Thank you, she breathed. Thank you for seeing me as more than just a transaction. They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the firelight, and when they finally separated to head to their respective bedrooms, Quinn felt something click into place inside him. He was falling in love with his ordinary wife, with her scarred hands and her wounded heart and her quiet strength. And it was the most extraordinary feeling he'd ever experienced. The weeks that followed established a rhythm to their life together. Quinn woke before dawn to handle the livestock, and Beatrice rose shortly after to prepare breakfast, and they ate together as the sun painted the eastern sky in brilliant colors. He taught her about the ranch, showing her how to collect eggs from the chickens without getting pecked, how to churn butter, how to read the weather by watching the clouds gather over the mountains. She transformed the house with small touches, curtains sewn from feed sacks that somehow looked cheerful rather than poor, wildflowers in jars on the table, the smell of bread baking filling the rooms with warmth. They talked endlessly, making up for all the years they'd lived separate lives, sharing stories and dreams and fears as they worked side by side. Quinn learned that Beatrice loved thunderstorms and hated the taste of coffee, that she could calculate figures in her head faster than he could write them down, that she sang quietly to herself when she thought no one was listening. Beatrice discovered that Quinn had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, that he was afraid of letting people down, that he read everything he could get his hands on despite having only a few years of formal schooling. The physical distance between them began to shrink naturally. Quinn would rest his hand on Beatrice's shoulder as he passed behind her in the kitchen, and she'd lean back into his touch. She'd brush dust from his shirt before he headed into town, her fingers lingering longer than necessary. They'd sit close on the porch in the evenings, watching the stars emerge, and gradually the space between them would disappear, until they were pressed together from shoulder to hip, comfortable in each other's presence. It was Beatrice who finally bridged the gap completely. 6 weeks into their marriage, on a warm June night, she appeared in the doorway of Quinn's bedroom wearing her nightgown and with her hair loose around her shoulders. Quinn sat up immediately, concern flooding through him. "Is something wrong?" "No." She moved into the room slowly. "I just don't want to sleep alone anymore. I want to be your wife in every way, Quinn. I'm ready." He threw back the covers without a word, and she climbed into bed beside him, trembling slightly despite the warmth of the night. Quinn gathered her close, stroking her hair, letting her adjust to the intimacy of sharing a bed. "Are you sure?" he murmured against her temple. "There's no shame in waiting longer, I'm sure." She tilted her face up to his. "I trust you. And I think I'm falling in love with you. And I want to show you that in the way a wife should." Quinn kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, pouring all of his own growing feelings into the contact. And when she responded with enthusiasm despite her inexperience, he felt his heart expand in his chest. They made love slowly that night, Quinn taking his time to make sure she felt only pleasure. And when Beatrice cried out his name and clung to him as if he was the only solid thing in a spinning world, he knew that he'd found something he hadn't even known he was searching for, a connection that went beyond convenience or necessity into something profound and true. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Quinn traced patterns on Beatrice's bare shoulder. "I love you," he said, the words coming easily now that he'd acknowledged them to himself. "I know it hasn't been long, but I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. I love you too." Beatrice pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "You've given me a life worth living, Quinn. You've made me feel valuable and wanted and cherished. I was so afraid when I stepped off that train, but you've exceeded every hope I had." "You said you were ordinary," Quinn reminded her gently. "But you were wrong, Beatrice. There's nothing ordinary about your courage or your strength or the way you've transformed this house into a home. There's nothing ordinary about how you make me feel, like I could take on the whole world as long as you were beside me." "Maybe we're both extraordinary together," Beatrice suggested, her voice drowsy with contentment. Two ordinary people who found something special. I can live with that. Quinn pulled the blanket over them both. Sleep now, love. Tomorrow we've got work to do. The summer passed in a golden haze of happiness. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, with Beatrice's sharp mind for finances helping Quinn make better decisions about purchasing and sales. She started a vegetable garden behind the house, coaxing tomatoes and squash and beans from the Wyoming soil with determination and careful tending. Quinn expanded the cattle operation, hiring 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload. Young men from town who were respectful to Beatrice and hardworking under Quinn's supervision. In August, Samuel and Martha invited them to a barn dance being held at a neighboring ranch, and Quinn insisted on teaching Beatrice to dance beforehand, spinning her around the sitting room while she laughed and stepped on his toes. The dance itself was crowded and loud, with musicians playing fiddles and guitars while couples swung each other around the floor. Quinn kept Beatrice close, aware of the other men's eyes on his pretty wife, and she seemed content to dance only with him, her face flushed and happy in the lamplight. They were driving home in the wagon under a sky full of stars when Beatrice suddenly pressed a hand to her stomach, her expression turning inward. Quinn pulled the horses to a stop immediately. "What's wrong? Are you ill?" "No, I don't think so." She looked up at him with wonder in her eyes. "Quinn, I think I might be with child. I've been feeling strange for the past week and I'm late with my monthly courses." Joy exploded through Quinn's chest, so intense it almost hurt. "You're sure?" "No, not completely, but all the signs are there." She bit her lip. "Are you happy about it?" "I know we haven't been married long." Quinn pulled her into his arms, kissing her soundly. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it. You've just given me the best news of my entire life." He pressed his hand gently to her still flat stomach. "A baby, our baby." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I was so afraid you'd think it was too soon, that we needed more time." "There's no such thing as too soon for this," Quinn assured her. "You're going to be an amazing mother, Beatrice. And I promise I'll do everything I can to be a good father." They sat there in the wagon for a long time, holding each other and planning for the future, talking about names and whether they'd need to add another room to the house, and how they'd manage the ranch work as Beatrice's pregnancy progressed. By the time they made it home, Quinn felt as if he might burst from happiness, and he carried Beatrice to bed despite her protests that she was perfectly capable of walking, making love to her with a reverence and gentleness that brought tears to both their eyes. The pregnancy was confirmed by the doctor in Evanston a week later, and Martha immediately took Beatrice under her wing, sharing advice and offering support that Quinn knew his wife needed since she had no mother or sisters of her own. Beatrice bloomed as the weeks passed, her body changing gradually, her natural reserve giving way to a contentment that made her even more beautiful in Quinn's eyes. He found himself touching her constantly, unable to resist placing his hand on her growing belly or pressing kisses to her temple, amazed that this woman had chosen him and was now carrying his child. The autumn brought the cattle drive, and Quinn struggled with leaving Beatrice even for the 2 weeks it would take to get the herd to market in Cheyenne. She was 4 months along by then, starting to show clearly, and he worried constantly about something happening while he was gone. "I'll be fine," Beatrice assured him as he delayed his departure yet again. "Martha will check on me every day, and the ranch hands are here if I need anything heavy lifted. You have to go, Quinn. This is our livelihood." "I know, but nothing." She cupped his face in her hands. "I love that you worry about me, but you have to trust that I can manage for 2 weeks. I survived 23 years without you. I think I can handle 14 days." Quinn finally left, but he pushed the cattle hard, cutting the trip down to 10 days and arriving back home exhausted but relieved to find Beatrice healthy and happy, her belly noticeably larger even in the short time he'd been gone. He spent the rest of the autumn preparing for winter and for the baby's arrival, converting the middle bedroom into a nursery and building a cradle from pine he'd cut and dried himself. Beatrice sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her scarred fingers moving with practiced efficiency, and they'd sit together in the evenings with her hand guiding his to feel the baby kick, sharing wonder at the life they'd created. Winter arrived with a vengeance in late November, bringing snow that piled in drifts higher than the fence posts and temperatures that made the air hurt to breathe. Quinn kept the fires burning constantly and rarely left Beatrice's side unless absolutely necessary for ranch work. She was 6 months along now, moving more carefully, her back aching by evening despite his attempts to help with everything. He'd rub her feet and back, massage her swollen ankles, fetch whatever foods she was craving at any hour of the day or night, anything to make her more comfortable. "You spoil me," Beatrice said one evening as Quinn returned from the kitchen with a jar of pickles and a cup of warm milk. "Good." He settled beside her on the couch, pulling her feet into his lap. "You're carrying my child through a Wyoming winter. The least I can do is get you pickles." She smiled, eating one with obvious satisfaction. "Do you ever regret answering my letter, taking a chance on an ordinary girl from St. Louis?" "Every single day," Quinn said seriously, and when her face fell, he continued, "I regret that you lived 23 years without me. I regret that you had to work in that factory and live in that terrible boarding house. I regret every moment of your life that was hard and lonely and painful. But I don't regret for 1 second that you're here now, that you're my wife, that we're having a baby together. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Beatrice Zeller." She set down the pickles and moved to straddle his lap carefully, her pregnant belly pressing against him as she kissed him with passion and gratitude. "I love you so much," she whispered against his mouth. "You took an ordinary life and made it extraordinary." "We did that together," Quinn corrected, holding her close. "And we're going to keep doing it for the next 50 years. The baby came early, arriving during a blizzard in late February of 1877, when the snow was so thick Quinn couldn't see 10 feet in front of his face. Beatrice's water broke just after breakfast, and panic seized Quinn as he realized there was no way to get to town for the doctor or even to fetch Martha. They were completely alone, snowed in, with only his limited knowledge of birthing cattle to guide him through bringing his child into the world. "It's all right," Beatrice said, breathing through a contraction with impressive calm. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. We'll manage." Quinn boiled water and gathered clean linens, trying to remember everything Martha had told him about the process, while simultaneously praying that nothing would go wrong. Labor progressed slowly through the day and into the night, and Quinn stayed by Beatrice's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, supporting her when she needed to walk or change positions. She was incredibly strong, bearing the pain with determination and occasional curses that would have made him laugh under different circumstances, and he fell even more deeply in love with her as he watched her labor to bring their child into the world. The baby finally arrived just before midnight, emerging with a lusty cry that was the most beautiful sound Quinn had ever heard. "It's a boy," he said, tears streaming down his face as he wrapped the squalling infant in a blanket and placed him on Beatrice's chest. "We have a son." Beatrice cradled the baby against her, exhausted but radiant, examining every tiny feature with wonder. "He's perfect," she breathed. "Quinn, look at him. He's absolutely perfect." Quinn carefully delivered the afterbirth and made sure Beatrice was settled comfortably before climbing into bed beside her and their son. The three of them huddled together as the blizzard raged outside. The baby had dark hair like his mother and what looked like Quinn's nose, and he was absolutely the most miraculous thing Quinn had ever seen. "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked, stroking the baby's cheek with one finger. They discussed names endlessly over the past months, debating options and changing their minds repeatedly. But now, looking at his son's face, Quinn knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," he said. "Thomas Samuel Zeller, after my father and the man who convinced me to send for a mail-order bride in the first place." "Thomas." Beatrice tested the name, smiling. "I like it. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to Wyoming, little one." The storm finally broke 2 days later, and Quinn immediately rode to fetch Martha and the doctor, both of whom examined mother and baby and declared them remarkably healthy considering the circumstances. Martha hugged Quinn so tightly he thought his ribs might crack. "You did well, boy," she said gruffly. "Not many men could have handled that situation without panicking." "I was absolutely panicking," Quinn admitted. "I just didn't let Beatrice see it. Life with a newborn was exhausting and overwhelming and more wonderful than Quinn could have imagined." Thomas was a good baby overall, nursing well and sleeping in manageable stretches, though there were nights when he screamed for hours with colic and Quinn and Beatrice took turns walking him around the house, singing softly and praying for relief. Quinn discovered a capacity for patience he hadn't known he possessed, changing diapers and bathing his son with gentle hands, amazed by how something so small could be so perfect. Beatrice flourished as a mother, though Quinn made sure she didn't push herself too hard in those early weeks, taking on more of the household tasks and hiring a woman from town to help with laundry and cleaning. He'd catch her nursing Thomas with a look of such complete contentment on her face that his heart would ache, and he'd think about that frightened woman who'd stepped off the train less than a year ago, certain she had nothing special to offer, and marvel at how wrong she'd been. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it transformed the landscape into something magical. Wildflowers carpeting the meadows and the creeks running high with snowmelt. Quinn took Beatrice and Thomas on gentle rides around the ranch, showing his son the land he'd one day inherit, and they'd have picnics by the stream with Thomas sleeping in a basket between them while they talked about their dreams for the future. "I want to expand the herd," Quinn said, lying back on the blanket with his hat over his face to block the sun. "Maybe bring in some horses too, start breeding them properly. There's a market for good cow ponies, and we've got the grazing land for it." "We'd need to build another barn," Beatrice pointed out practically, nursing Thomas under a blanket, "and hire more help. But I think it's a good idea. The ranch has done well this year, and we should reinvest the profits rather than just saving them." Quinn lifted his hat to look at her. "When did you become such a businesswoman?" "When I married a rancher who values my opinions." She smiled at him. "Besides, I'm good with numbers. I might as well put that to use." They did expand that summer, and Beatrice's management proved invaluable as they navigated the complexities of a growing operation. She kept meticulous records, negotiated better prices with suppliers, and somehow found time to care for Thomas and maintain their home while Quinn and the ranch hands worked from dawn to dusk building and training and expanding. It was hard work, but it was good work, building something meaningful together. Thomas grew rapidly, a happy baby who smiled early and often, especially at his parents. Quinn couldn't imagine loving anything more, until Beatrice told him she was pregnant again in October, 17 months after Thomas's birth. This time there was no uncertainty, Just joy and excitement and perhaps a small amount of panic as they realized they'd soon be outnumbered by their offspring. 2 children under 2 years old, Quinn said, lying in bed with his hand on Beatrice's stomach. We're either brave or insane. Probably both. Beatrice laughed. But we managed the first time. We'll manage again. This pregnancy was easier in some ways, harder in others. Beatrice knew what to expect, but chasing after an active toddler while carrying another baby took its toll. Quinn hired more help, bringing in a young woman named Sarah to assist with Thomas and the housework, and he made sure Beatrice rested as much as possible. She fought him on it at first, insisting she could handle everything, but eventually accepted that asking for help wasn't weakness but wisdom. The baby arrived in June of 1878, this time with Martha in attendance and the doctor standing by just in case. Labor was faster this time, and their daughter came into the world with a piercing cry that made Thomas, watching wide-eyed from the doorway with Sarah, burst into tears of sympathy. She was tiny and perfect, with Beatrice's honey-colored eyes and wisps of blonde hair that surprised them both. "A girl," Beatrice whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Quinn, we have a daughter." Quinn held his wife and new daughter, overcome with emotion, while Sarah brought Thomas over to meet his sister. The toddler touched her tiny hand with one finger, his expression serious. "Baby," he pronounced solemnly. "That's right, baby sister," Quinn said. "What do you think, Beatrice? What should we name her?" They'd chosen the name weeks ago, and Beatrice spoke it now with certainty. Clara Rose Zeller. Life with 2 small children was chaotic and exhausting, and filled with more love than Quinn had thought possible. Thomas adored his baby sister, bringing her toys and patting her gently whenever she cried. Beatrice somehow managed to keep everyone fed and clothed and relatively clean, though there were days when Quinn came in from the range to find her sitting on the floor surrounded by children and laundry, looking completely overwhelmed. He'd lift her up, settle her in a chair with a cup of tea, and take over with the children, giving her a few moments to breathe. "I love our life," she told him one evening after the children were finally asleep, and they'd collapsed on the porch swing, too tired to make it to bed. "But some days I wonder how we're surviving. One moment at a time," Quinn said, pulling her against his side. "And we're not just surviving, love, we're thriving. Look at what we've built together." She tilted her face up to kiss him softly. "You're right. I just get tired sometimes." "Then we'll rest together." He stroked her hair. "And tomorrow we'll face whatever comes, just like we always do." The years flowed past in a river of seasons and milestones. Thomas took his first steps, then Clara did the same. They learned to talk, filling the house with chatter and laughter, and the occasional fight over toys that Quinn and Beatrice had to mediate. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the county, known for quality cattle and well-trained horses. Beatrice's business acumen became legendary, with other ranchers' wives seeking her advice, and Quinn took pride in introducing her as his partner in every sense of the word. Old Samuel passed away peacefully in 1880, and Martha moved to live with her daughter in Cheyenne, but not before telling Quinn that she'd never seen 2 people better suited for each other than him and Beatrice. The funeral was hard, but it reminded Quinn not to take any moment for granted, to cherish every day he had with his family. In 1882, Beatrice announced she was pregnant again, and this time they both felt ready, their routine established, and their older children excited about a new baby. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and when their second son arrived in December, healthy and loud, Thomas and Clara crowded around to welcome him. "His name is Henry," Quinn told them, holding the baby carefully. Henry Martin Zeller, and you're going to help us take care of him." Both children took their responsibilities seriously. Thomas at 5 years old and Clara at 4, fetching diapers and singing to the baby when he cried. The house felt complete now, filled to bursting with love and noise and the beautiful chaos of a growing family. Quinn watched Beatrice one morning as she sat at the kitchen table with all 3 children, teaching Thomas his letters while Clara drew pictures and Henry gurgled in her lap, and he was struck by how far they'd come. The frightened woman who'd stepped off that train 6 years ago had become confident, capable, deeply loved and loving in return. She'd transformed his house into a home, his solitary existence into a rich family life, his future from uncertain to full of promise. "What are you staring at?" Beatrice asked, looking up to catch him watching. "My extraordinary wife," Quinn said, moving to stand behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. "I'm still ordinary," she protested, but there was laughter in her voice now, not the desperate certainty from that first day. "No, you're not." "You never were." Quinn bent to kiss the top of her head. "You're the woman who traveled halfway across the country on faith. You're the mother who gave birth in a blizzard with only me to help. You're the partner who helped build this ranch into something remarkable. You're the love of my life and the reason I get up every morning. There's nothing ordinary about any of that." Beatrice reached up to cover his hands with hers. "Then I suppose we're both extraordinary," she said, echoing her words from their wedding night. "Two ordinary people who found something special. That works for me." Quinn moved around to lift Henry from her lap, cuddling his youngest son. "Though I think what we found was each other, and everything else just followed from that." The children grew, and the ranch prospered, and the love between Quinn and Beatrice deepened with each passing year. They faced challenges together, droughts and hard winters and sick livestock, and all the struggles that came with raising children and running a business. But they faced everything as partners, making decisions together, supporting each other through difficult times, celebrating victories as a team. Thomas grew into a serious boy with his father's work ethic and his mother's sharp mind, already helping with ranch work by the time he was 8. Clara was spirited and creative, constantly drawing or making up stories, her imagination boundless. Henry was gentle and sweet, the peacemaker of the family, always trying to smooth over conflicts between his siblings. In 1885, when Thomas was 8, Clara was 7, and Henry was 3, Beatrice approached Quinn with a serious expression. They were alone in their bedroom, the children finally asleep, and she sat on the edge of the bed twisting her hands together. "What's wrong?" Quinn asked immediately, sitting beside her. "Nothing's wrong exactly." She took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about how lucky we've been, how much we have, and I want to do something meaningful with our success." "What did you have in mind?" "There are women like I was," Beatrice said slowly. "Women trapped in terrible situations with no way out, no options, no hope. What if we could help some of them? Not as mail-order brides necessarily, but just giving them a chance at something better. We have the resources now. We could hire them to work on the ranch, give them safe housing and fair wages, help them build new lives." Quinn studied his wife's face, seeing the passion and purpose in her eyes. "You want to create opportunities for women who need them?" "Yes. Is that foolish?" "Are we too established to take risks like that?" "It's not foolish at all." Quinn pulled her into his arms. "It's generous and compassionate and exactly the kind of thing you would think of. And yes, we absolutely should do it." They started small, hiring 2 women from a difficult situation in Evanston, providing them with work as housekeepers and cooks, paying them wages that allowed them to save money and build independence. Word spread, and more women came, and within 2 years they had a system in place, helping women transition from desperate circumstances into new lives with dignity and purpose. Some stayed on the ranch permanently. Others moved on after gaining skills and savings, but all of them left with something they hadn't had before: hope and possibility. Beatrice threw herself into the project, and Quinn watched her flourish in this new role, using her own experience to connect with and support these women. It added more work to their already busy lives, but it felt important, necessary, a way of paying forward the chance that Quinn had given Beatrice all those years ago. The children absorbed the lessons their parents were teaching through action, learning compassion and generosity and the importance of helping those less fortunate. Thomas was particularly drawn to one of the young women they'd hired, a quiet girl named Anne who worked in the stables, and Quinn had to hide his smile as he watched his 13-year-old son find excuses to be wherever Anne was working. Puppy love, harmless and sweet, and a reminder that time kept moving forward. In 1890, Quinn woke on a spring morning to find Beatrice already up, sitting by the window and watching the sunrise. He joined her, wrapping a blanket around them both, and they sat in comfortable silence as the world woke around them. "It's been 14 years," Beatrice said softly. 14 years since I stepped off that train, absolutely terrified, certain I was making the biggest mistake of my life. "And instead," Quinn prompted, "instead I found everything I didn't even know I was looking for." She leaned against him. "A partner, a love, a family, a purpose. You gave me all of that, Quinn." "We gave it to each other," he corrected. "You transformed my life just as much as I transformed yours. More, probably. I was just existing before you arrived. You taught me how to actually live." They sat together as the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Quinn thought about that letter he'd received so many years ago, about the woman who'd called herself ordinary, and the promise he'd made in return. He'd meant it then, that he'd love ordinary forever, but what he'd discovered was that ordinary was just another word for real, for human, for the everyday magic of building a life with someone who chose to face every challenge beside you. Thomas was 15 now, tall and strong, already as capable as many of the ranch hands. Clara was 12, her artistic talents developing into genuine skill with both drawing and painting. Henry was 8, still gentle and sweet, with a special gift for working with horses that surprised everyone. They were good children, growing into good people, and Quinn knew that was largely due to Beatrice's influence, her patient guidance and unconditional love. More years passed in that way time has of accelerating as you age, and suddenly, Thomas was 21 and preparing to build his own house on ranch land, planning to marry Anne who'd grown from a frightened 16-year-old into a confident young woman. Clara was 18 and had been accepted to a teaching program in Cheyenne, her intelligence and creativity making her a natural educator. Henry was 14 and already indispensable on the ranch, with an intuitive understanding of animals that Quinn had never seen before. The wedding of Thomas and Anne was a large affair, held at the ranch, with what seemed like the entire county in attendance. Quinn watched his oldest son say his vows to the young woman he loved, and he caught Beatrice's eye across the crowd, remembering their own simple ceremony in that small church all those years ago. She smiled at him, and he knew she was thinking the same thing, marveling at how their decision to take a chance on each other had led to all of this. A family and a legacy, and love that multiplied rather than divided as it was shared. At the reception, Quinn pulled Beatrice onto the dance floor, just as he had at their first barn dance together, and they swayed together to the fiddle music. She was 45 now, with silver threads in her brown hair and lines around her eyes from years of smiling, and she'd never been more beautiful to him. "You remember teaching me to dance in our sitting room?" Beatrice asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "I remember every moment with you," Quinn said honestly. "Every single one, from that first glimpse of you on the train platform to right now. It's all been precious. Even the hard times, especially the hard times because we faced them together." He spun her gently. "You're still the best decision I ever made, Beatrice Zeller. And you're still the man who promised to love ordinary forever," she said, looking up at him. "Though I think we've proven that ordinary lives can be pretty extraordinary when you're living them with the right person." Clara left for her teaching program that fall, and the house felt too quiet without her chatter and laughter. Henry stepped up to fill the gap, but it was different, a reminder that their children were growing up and moving on, living their own lives. Quinn and Beatrice adjusted, rediscovering what it meant to be just the two of them plus one, remembering the early days of their marriage when it had been just them in this house full of possibilities. In 1896, Beatrice's health began to decline subtly. Nothing dramatic, just increased fatigue and occasional dizziness that she tried to hide. Quinn noticed, of course, because he'd spent 20 years learning to read every expression and gesture, and he insisted she see the doctor despite her protests that she was fine. The diagnosis was her heart, weakened by years of hard work and stress, treatable to a point but ultimately something she'd have to manage carefully. Quinn was devastated, but Beatrice took it with characteristic pragmatism. "We've had 20 wonderful years," she said as they sat in the doctor's office. "That's more than many people get. I'm not going to waste whatever time I have left being afraid." "You're not going anywhere," Quinn said fiercely. "We'll follow the doctor's orders exactly. You'll rest more, let others handle the heavy work. We'll make this manageable." And they did, adjusting their routine to accommodate Beatrice's limitations. She chafed against the restrictions initially, hating being seen as weak or incapable, but Quinn was relentless in his insistence that she take care of herself. The women they'd helped over the years stepped up to assist, repaying the kindness Beatrice had shown them, and gradually she accepted that asking for help wasn't giving up, but rather being wise enough to recognize her own limits. Henry, at 17, became especially attentive to his mother, checking on her constantly, and taking over many of the household tasks she'd previously handled. Quinn watched his youngest son's devotion with pride, seeing how Beatrice's influence had shaped him into a caring, thoughtful young man. Clara returned home for the summer of 1897, bringing with her stories of teaching and city life, and the house came alive again with her energy. She'd matured into a confident young woman, passionate about education and social reform, full of ideas and opinions that she expressed with the fearlessness Beatrice had always encouraged in her. Thomas and Anne visited frequently with their new baby, a daughter they'd named Beatrice, and Quinn's wife cried happy tears when she held her namesake for the first time. "A grandmother," Beatrice said wonderingly, cuddling the baby. "I never thought I'd live to see this day." "You'll live to see many more," Quinn said firmly, though fear clutched at his heart. The doctor had been clear that Beatrice's condition was progressive, that they needed to treasure each day they had. That fall, Henry announced his intention to marry a rancher's daughter from the next county over, a sensible girl named Ruth, who loved horses as much as he did. The wedding was planned for the following spring, and Beatrice threw herself into the preparations with an energy that worried Quinn even as it made her happy. He couldn't bring himself to dampen her joy by insisting she rest more, so instead he stayed close, ready to catch her if she faltered, making sure she didn't push herself too hard. The wedding was beautiful, held in April of 1898 as the world burst into bloom around them. Beatrice looked tired but radiant in a new dress Clara had helped her sew, and she danced with Quinn at the reception despite the doctor's warnings to avoid exertion. He held her carefully, moving slowly, treasuring every second. "All three of our children are married now," Beatrice said, her voice soft. "We did well, Quinn. They're all happy and settled and good people. We can be proud of that." "I'm proud of you," Quinn corrected. "You're the one who shaped them, who taught them kindness and compassion and strength. Everything good in them comes from you." "That's not true. Their integrity and work ethic come from you." She smiled up at him. "We balanced each other just like we always have." Summer arrived and Beatrice's condition worsened noticeably. She had good days and bad days, and Quinn made sure to be present for all of them, rarely leaving her side unless absolutely necessary for ranch business. They spent long hours on the porch swing, watching the world go by, talking about everything and nothing, holding hands like newlyweds. On a warm evening in July, with the sunset painting the sky in impossible colors, Beatrice turned to Quinn with a serious expression. "I need you to promise me something." "Anything," Quinn said immediately. "When I'm gone, I don't want you to stop living. You're only 47. You'll have years ahead of you, and I want you to fill them with joy and purpose, not grief and loneliness." She gripped his hand tightly. "Promise me you'll keep running the ranch, keep helping those women who need it, keep being present for our children and grandchildren. Don't let my death be the end of your life, too. Beatrice, promise me, Quinn." Tears streamed down her face. "I need to know you'll be all right." "I promise," he said, though the words felt like broken glass in his throat. "But you're not going anywhere. We're going to have years together still." She smiled sadly. "I hope so. But just in case, I needed you to promise." 2 weeks later, Beatrice collapsed while working in her garden. Quinn found her lying among the tomato plants, her face gray and her breathing labored, and he carried her into the house screaming for Henry to fetch the doctor. She regained consciousness in their bedroom, surrounded by Quinn and all 3 children who'd rushed to her side, and she looked at each of them with love shining in her honey-colored eyes. "I'm so proud of all of you," she whispered. "Live good lives. Love each other. Take care of your father." "Mama, don't talk like that," Clara sobbed. "You're going to be fine." But Beatrice just smiled and turned her gaze to Quinn, who was gripping her hand so tightly it must have hurt, though she didn't complain. 22 years, she said softly. "Best years of my life, every single one. Thank you for seeing past ordinary to something worth loving." "There was never anything ordinary about you," Quinn said, his voice breaking. "You were always extraordinary. You just couldn't see it until you let yourself be loved." "Then I'll love ordinary forever," Beatrice whispered, echoing his words from that first day at the ranch. "Because you made ordinary into something magical." She closed her eyes then, her breathing becoming shallower, and despite the doctor's desperate efforts, she slipped away as the evening light faded from the sky. She died surrounded by the family she'd created, in the home she'd helped build, having lived a life that was anything but ordinary despite her insistence otherwise. Quinn held her long after she'd gone, refusing to let go, unable to accept that the woman who'd transformed his entire existence was really gone. His children wept around him, and neighbors and friends began arriving as word spread, but Quinn was aware of none of it. His world had shrunk to the woman in his arms, and the unbearable knowledge that he'd have to learn how to live without her. The funeral was the largest Evanston had ever seen. Women Beatrice had helped over the years came from across Wyoming and beyond, wanting to pay their respects to the woman who'd given them hope. Ranchers and business people she'd worked with, neighbors, and friends they'd made over more than 2 decades. All crowded into the church and spilled out into the street. Quinn stood at the front, numb with grief, and listened as person after person spoke about Beatrice's kindness, her generosity, her sharp mind and gentle heart, her unwavering belief in the potential of others. "She changed my life," one woman said through tears. "I was nothing when I came to the Zeller ranch, and she helped me become someone. She believed in me when no one else did, including myself." Story after story, all the same theme, lives touched and transformed by a woman who'd called herself ordinary. Quinn thought about that letter he'd received 22 years ago, about Beatrice's warning that she was unremarkable, nothing special, and he wanted to shout at the universe for the injustice of losing someone so precious, someone who'd spent her whole life not recognizing her own worth until he'd convinced her otherwise. They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains and the endless sky she'd loved. Quinn stood at the grave long after everyone else had left, and he made her a promise. "I'll keep going," he said to the freshly turned earth. "I'll keep the ranch running and keep helping those women and be there for our children and grandchildren. I'll live the life you wanted me to live, Beatrice. But don't ever think I'll forget you or stop loving you, because that's impossible. You're woven into every part of who I am." The weeks that followed were the hardest of Quinn's life. He went through the motions of daily existence, handling ranch business and maintaining the house, but everything felt hollow without Beatrice beside him. His children stayed close, worried about him, but he sent them back to their own lives eventually, not wanting them to sacrifice their happiness for his grief. It was the women Beatrice had helped who ultimately saved him from drowning in sorrow. They came in shifts, cooking meals and handling housework, and simply sitting with him when the loneliness became unbearable. They shared their own stories of loss and survival, reminding him that life continued even when it seemed impossible, that honoring Beatrice's memory meant living fully rather than merely existing. Quinn threw himself into the work Beatrice had been passionate about, expanding the program to help even more women, establishing it as a formal charitable foundation with proper funding and structure. He named it the Beatrice Zeller Foundation for Women's Opportunity, ensuring her legacy would continue long after he was gone. It gave him purpose during those dark months, a way to channel his grief into something positive and meaningful. Thomas and Anne had another baby, a son they named Quinn. Clara returned home to teach at the newly established school in Evanston, wanting to be closer to her father. Henry and Ruth took over more of the ranch operations, allowing Quinn to focus on the foundation while still remaining involved in the business he'd built. Slowly, painfully, Quinn learned how to live in a world without Beatrice. He never stopped missing her, never stopped reaching for her in bed only to find emptiness, never stopped wanting to share his thoughts and experiences with her. But he kept his promise, filling his days with purpose, and his heart with memories of the extraordinary life they'd built together. 2 years after Beatrice's death, on the anniversary of the day they'd met, Quinn stood on the train platform in Evanston and watched a young woman disembark with a worn carpetbag, looking around with frightened, hopeful eyes. She was meeting a rancher from the next county, another mail-order bride taking a chance on an unknown future, and Quinn felt his heart clench with memory. He approached her gently. "Miss, are you waiting for someone?" "Yes, a Mr. Patterson. Do you know him?" "I do. He's a good man." Quinn smiled. "I'm Quinn Zeller. I own a ranch north of here. My wife came here as a mail-order bride 24 years ago, and we had a wonderful life together until she passed 2 years back." The young woman's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. But I wanted to tell you that taking this chance, coming here despite your fear, That's one of the bravest things a person can do. My wife used to say she was ordinary, nothing special, but she was wrong. She was extraordinary in all the ways that mattered, and I'd wager you are too. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise. Tears filled the young woman's eyes. That's very kind of you to say. It's just the truth. Quinn tipped his hat. Good luck, miss. I hope you find as much happiness as I did. He walked away, leaving the young woman to her future, and he felt Beatrice's presence beside him like a warm breeze, approving and loving and forever part of him. He'd promised to love ordinary forever, and he'd kept that promise, discovering that ordinary was just another word for real, for true, for the kind of love that transforms everything it touches into something precious and irreplaceable. Quinn lived another 15 years, seeing his grandchildren grow and his children prosper, continuing Beatrice's work through the foundation and remaining active in the ranch operations well into his 60s. He never remarried, though several women expressed interest over the years. Beatrice had been his great love, his partner, his best friend, and he had no desire to try replacing something irreplaceable. He died peacefully in his sleep in 1915, at the age of 64, in the house he'd shared with Beatrice all those years ago. His children found him in the morning, lying in their bed with a smile on his face and Beatrice's faded photograph clutched in his hand. They buried him next to her on that hill overlooking the ranch, reuniting them after 17 years apart. The foundation continued operating for decades, helping hundreds of women build new lives, and the ranch remained in the family through multiple generations. Thomas's great-grandchildren would eventually run it, maintaining the traditions Quinn and Beatrice had established while adapting to changing times. The story of the mail-order bride who'd called herself ordinary and the cowboy who'd promised to love her forever became family legend, passed down through the years as an example of what real love looked like. Because that's what they'd had, Quinn and Beatrice Zeller, a love that was real and true and built on mutual respect and partnership and the daily choice to see each other clearly and cherish what they found. She'd been wrong about being ordinary, but he'd been right that it didn't matter, that ordinary lives lived with love and purpose become extraordinary simply through the living of them. Their legacy wasn't wealth or fame or grand accomplishments, though they'd achieved plenty in their years together. Their legacy was love, the kind that multiplies and spreads and touches lives in ways you can never fully measure. 3 children who grew up secure in their parents' affection and passed that same security to their own children. Countless women given chances they'd never have had otherwise, opportunities to build lives of dignity and purpose. A ranch that prospered for generations, providing employment and stability for families throughout the region. A foundation that continued helping people long after its founders were gone. And at the center of it all, a promise kept, a cowboy who'd vowed to love ordinary forever and a bride who'd learned that ordinary was exactly enough when you found the right person to share it with. They'd taken a chance on each other. 2 strangers who'd met at a train station in 1876, and they'd built something beautiful from that single moment of faith. That was their true legacy, the proof that love doesn't require perfect circumstances or ideal conditions, just 2 people willing to work together, support each other, and choose love every single day no matter what challenges arise. The wind still blows across the Wyoming plains, rustling through the grass on that hill where Quinn and Beatrice lie side by side, their headstones weathered but still readable. Visitors to the ranch sometimes climb up there, drawn by the story they've heard, wanting to pay respects to the couple who proved that ordinary people living ordinary lives can create something extraordinary through the simple act of loving well. And maybe, just maybe, if you stand there quietly enough on the right kind of evening, with the sunset painting the sky and the mountains standing eternal in the distance, you can feel it, the echo of that great love that transformed two lonely people into partners, into parents, into the architects of a legacy that outlived them both. Because some promises transcend death, and Quinn Zeller's vow to love ordinary forever was one of them, kept faithfully for all his days and honored still by everyone whose lives were touched by the remarkable story of two people who found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from that finding.